Hello and welcome to the program. I'm your host, Neal Howard, here on Health Professional Radio. Glad that you could join us. In our series on the 2018 scientific sessions of the Society for Cardiovascular and Angiography and Interventions, Dr. James Hermiller is joining us today from the St. Vincent Medical Group at the Heart Center to discuss the results of one of the studies that was presented there. Welcome to the program, Dr. Hermiller.
Neal, thanks so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. So give us a bit of background about yourself, and let's jump right into this Abbott Post-Approval Study.
Yeah, so I'm in Indianapolis at St. Vincent Heart Center, an interventional cardiologist here, and we're going to talk about the MitraClip today.
Yep.
And it's actually something I've been involved in for, the last decade plus. It turns out that the MitraClip is approved for patients who are at high risk for standard open heart surgery for their mitral valve surgery, and probably half of all patients who are symptomatic from severe mitral regurgitation really don't get an option to have surgery. They're too old or they're too sick. And so that's what the MitraClip is for, and about 60,000 patients worldwide have been treated. It was approved in the U.S. Back in 2013, and this represents a post-approval study. It was sort of what the FDA required of Abbott when they approved it to look at these patients, and that's what we're going to talk about.
So what were some of the results?
Yeah, so it was 2,000 patients. It was the first 2,000 patients treated in the U.S. First of all, the procedure itself was very successful. The number of patients who had clips implanted was 97+%. If we look at some of the earlier results, it was much less than this. Actually, the procedure times and device times were quite reasonable, a device time of about an hour and a half. So we've really gotten much better over the years at technically putting this in.
You say that you've been involved with this particular, this MitraClip for the last decade or so. Does this last couple of years represent a huge jump as far as improvements?
Yeah, what I would say is really probably at about the time this was approved, the imaging that really drives this. It's cardiac ultrasound, it's transesophageal echocardiography, has gotten so good that we're able to see what we're doing much better, and so the procedure is much more effective and I think efficient. So I think that's what's really driven the success.
You know, you mentioned patients that were either too old or too sick to have the surgery. Are we talking significant longevity in these first 2,000 patients?
Yeah, so if you kind of look at the average age of these patients, 79 and a half years old, so they were more elderly. Their risk as far as open heart surgery estimated from the regular risk score was about 11%, which is very high for open heart surgery these days. So, they're higher risk patients. They've had open heart surgery, many of them before. They've got renal dysfunction, some are on dialysis, but their life expectancy is still pretty darn good. If you look at the mortality over that first year in this group of patients, it was about 20%, which for this elderly sick group is actually better than one would estimate if you didn't treat their severe mitral regurgitation. The other thing was that the incidence of complications related to that procedure were quite low. Stroke was very low. Bleeding was low. The need for repeat intervention to the mitral valve was quite low.
Were these results things that were expected based on the research and development over the last decade or so? Or were there any surprises that maybe will catapult this research even further?
Yeah, great question. So I think what was surprising is that when you sort of started to use this in the real world with operators who weren't experienced, it actually, the data reflect very well what was seen in all the randomized and the controlled trials in expert centers. So the way that this was transmitted out in the community really reflected what we'd seen in the research studies. And that's really what we like to see. You hate to release a new technology that's so complex that when it's actually used out there, you don't get the results that you do during the studies in the big centers. So I think that was very reassuring.
What about patient understanding of the procedures and how it was going to benefit them?
Yeah, so first of all, if you look at the ability to reduce that leakage of the mitral valve, the mitral regurgitation, by at a year follow-up, 85% of them still had mild to modest mitral regurgitation, and 95+% started with severe mitral regurgitation. So you were able to really reduce the amount of leak. We also saw that the heart remodeled, so the chamber sizes were reduced, which is a favorable finding. And if you look at how the patients felt, so 90% of them had advanced symptoms when they came in, advanced heart failure symptoms. And at a year, it flipped. 85% of them really were feeling well. They were function class 1 or 2. So it was a sort of dramatic improvement in how they felt.
Well, based on these positive results, what do you think is next for the study?
Yeah, so if you look at what the approval is right now for the MitraClip in the U.S., it is for patients with primary valvular mitral regurgitation. So they're generally they have mitral valve prolapse, but they're too old to have open heart surgery. The next big thing is to get this approved for patients who have secondary mitral regurgitation. They have heart failure, they have ventricular dilatation. Their valve actually is okay, the leaflets are okay, but they've been pulled apart because the ventricle is sick. And this is approved over in Europe and many of the other places in the world, but we don't have that approval yet in the U.S. And there's going to be a large randomized trial comparing the MitraClip to medical therapy in that group of patients, which we expect to come out in the fall. And that'll be a very important study. It's called COAP.
Well, where can we go online and learn some more about the St. Vincent Medical Group and about the 2018 scientific sessions as well?
Yeah, it was really an exciting San Diego this year for SCAI. I would say one other thing that I didn't mention is the quality of life. We did a questionnaire, Kansas City quality of life questionnaire, and the metrics for quality of life almost doubled, which is sort of unheard of. So these patients, they felt better as far as their functional status, but their quality of life was substantially improved. And then these elderly sick patients, that's what they really want.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking with you today, James, and I'm hoping you'll give us some updates as things progress, as this approval moves forward and research progresses as well. Thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you so much for having me.
You've been listening to Health Professional Radio, in studio with Dr. James Hermiller. Transcripts and audio of this program are available at healthprofessionalradio.com.au and also at hpr.fm. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, listen in, and download at SoundCloud. And be sure to visit our affiliates page at hpr.fm.